Well, good morning, everyone. I first want to thank Martin for inviting me to this, be involved in this session. I was thrilled to get the invitation. I'm thrilled to be here this week for the meetings. Mindful that I'm the last presentation before lunch, I'll move through relatively quickly, and if anyone has any questions or if I wasn't clear on anything during this short presentation, I'd love to talk more about it during lunch. So if you're an Indigenous person living in Canada, there's a strong likelihood that you're going to experience food insecurity. This applies to Métis, First Nation, and Inuit people. And the further north you go in Canada, that likelihood of being food insecure increases dramatically, with communities in the Arctic suffering tremendously from being food insecure. Some of the more stark realities facing Inuit in particular is that 25% of preschoolers are experiencing severe food insecurity. 90% of that percentage go hungry, 76% skip meals, and 60 goes days without eating at all at very high rates. In general, Canada does relatively well in meeting the food needs of its population, but Inuit not so. Nunavut, Inuvialuit, and the Natcher regions all experience high rates of food insecurity. There's a host of causes, drivers of these conditions across the Arctic, and we certainly don't have time to get into all of them, but certainly changing climate is stressing the food systems of northern communities. Colonialism still has a significant impact on the lives and food systems of the North, but access and costs are often identified as being two of the most significant drivers of food insecurity in the North. In 2011, the federal government introduced the Nutrition North program in hope of easing some of these challenges around access and food costs. And the program, in very basic terms, provides subsidies to northern retailers to provide a wider range of foods at a somewhat reduced cost to northerners. Costs in the North often double or triple what the healthy food basket would cost in the South. So through this program, on average, about 26 million kilograms of food is shipped annually to northern communities. That's at a cost of roughly $70 million a year. If we look specifically at meat and fish, approximately 5 million kilograms are shipped from southern destinations to northern communities at a cost of about $12 million annually. These foods often include some of the labels that are presented here, sliders, which is a small little hamburger, or chicken strips, or meatballs. Foods that would not be considered a traditional diet to Inuit or Dene or Gwich'in people, but these are the types of foods that are being shipped predominantly through the Nutrition North program. At the same time, the northern Canada, Arctic Canada, produces quite a bit of wild food or traditional foods. This includes fisheries, muskox, caribou, a wide range of wild foods. Northern Canada doesn't compare very well with Norway or some of the other Arctic countries in the number of food producers that are in the region, but we still have over a dozen, and some are continue to be developed in northern production of country foods. Foods that would be considered culturally appropriate, culturally acceptable to northern communities. However, that food that's produced in northern Canada by and large gets shipped to international destinations, with virtually none of that food staying within the Arctic region. 40% or nearly 50% of the food moves down to the United States, 20% moving to China, with the balance being distributed between Europe and Asia countries. Same with seal. Certainly the number, seal meat, pelts, and oil production has declined because of failing markets, but there's still quite a bit of seal meat being shipped to Asian countries. Now, similar patterns, but not nearly to the same extent as Canada and Alaska, have similar export patterns. The food, the meat and fish that are produced in Arctic countries, a significant portion is being exported to international markets. And while there's some capture of this food in the north, for the north, much of it leaves the Arctic regions. So in terms of volume of this export, approximately 5.6 billion kilograms is exported annually to international markets at a revenue of about $24.8 billion US. So significant volumes and significant revenues are generated from the export of wild foods from the Arctic regions. So why isn't more of this? I mean, we're certainly not calling for an abandonment of exports, but why can't we capture some of this export for local food needs of northern communities? And that's what a project I'm currently involved with, supported by the Arctic Council Sustainable Development Working Group, is trying to understand. How can we capture some of this food and make it more available to the communities in the Arctic who need it most? Now, there's a host of challenges, and I'm sure many of you are already familiar with this around, or thinking about clusters. Certainly, the limited infrastructure in Canada challenges the development of that north to north or east to west value chain. Transportation is limited. Landing sites are limited, storage facilities are often inadequate, and food inspection and policies are often a limiting factor in making that northern food or Arctic foods available to those Arctic communities. A host of policy and legal regimes, oftentimes couched within the very land claims agreements that were meant to empower Indigenous peoples, acts as constraints to actually the sale or production and sale of country foods. Limited communication and coordination between value chain actors, all of which continue to be an over-reliance on raw export of Arctic foods. So this has brought us to this point of trying to think more strategically about how we overcome some of these constraints to Arctic food production. And is there an opportunity for Arctic Foods Innovation Cluster? We see this at this very conceptual stage as being a new way to think about Arctic food production. Can we create hubs of expertise between Indigenous communities, industry, investors, and governments, all converged on this idea of food innovations? Can they be an incubator for business models, products, new technologies that are developed in cooperation with Indigenous communities to enhance their food production opportunities? Can we bring greater awareness to the Arctic as a food-producing region that is globally recognized for its unique origins? Is there a willingness to pay for Arctic foods that are produced in a sustainable way by Indigenous peoples in the region? And can this Arctic Foods Innovation Cluster be a leader in food innovations that help address some of the real-world challenges that Indigenous communities and Arctic communities in general are facing and trying to meet their food needs? I work closely with the Canadian delegates to this on the Sustainable Development Working Group to the Arctic Council, and they're prepared to advance this idea of an Arctic Foods Innovation Cluster to the Sustainable Development Working Group with the idea of generating more excitement, more interest in this project. I encourage everyone here, as well as the networks that you all are in, if there is interest in developing this type of cluster, this innovation cluster around food production, either contact me or your representatives to the Sustainable Development Working Group to voice your support for developing this type of cluster and working more cooperatively around addressing food needs and Arctic economic development. Thank you.